Hey, how you guys doing this morning? Excellent. My name is Nate, and I am the lead pastor of the Front Church. And if you are new, maybe you are from another tradition, maybe you don't consider yourself particularly religious, I just want to say we're so excited to have you here. And we're creating the Front Church for you. For people who are from another tradition and looking to explore. For people who don't consider themselves particularly religious. And so right now, I kind of want to give you a picture before we jump into the message about where we are as a church and where we're headed. And so where we are as a church is we're in our preseason. Everything that happens before Sunday, September 12th, which is when we do our grand opening, is our preseason. And things look a little different in the preseason than they will in the season. Right now, our auditorium actually looks a little different now than it's going to look once we have our grand opening. The space that you walked over through to get to here, we're actually going to transform that into a cafe and a welcome center. But right now it's just kind of a barren wasteland that you walk through to get over here. If you walk down the hallway, we're going to transform multiple rooms into our kid front spaces, which we're so pumped about. At the Front Church, kids are the main thing, and we make kids the main thing. And so we are going to transform several of those spaces into our kid front spaces. So that's all coming, but right now in our preseason, it's just a simpler setup. And so also, before we jump in, you got to know about Kids Camp. Kids Camp is 1 week from tomorrow. And so please, if you have kids, you should bring your kids to Kids Camp 1 week from tomorrow. If you have friends who have kids, you should tell them to bring their kids to Kids Camp. We're praying for 100 kids. We're believing that God's going to just bless these kids, bless families who come. We're excited to serve, and we just cannot wait for Forged, a Jesus adventure coming a week from tomorrow. Every morning since I returned from vacation almost a month ago, it's been the same thing for me. I have this tornado swirl in my mind of things that need to get done. And it feels crazier the closer we get to Sunday, September 12th, and the closer we get to Kids Camp. But it's just this swirl, and it feels quite overwhelming. It feels like I'm in over my head. And that's kind of my biggest temptation right now, is just to jump in. Because if I just jump in, I end up working at a frenetic pace, and I feel like I can never keep up. And then I just feel like it's chaos, and I don't work from a place of peace. I don't work from a centered place. I just feel like I'm spiraling. And part of the reason I wake up with the swirl in my mind is because there is a lot to be done, and we could use you to do some of it. And you should come to the picnic after today's gathering, and you'll hear even more about how you can get involved. The picnic's just 2 blocks that way, and it's going to be a good time, and we have plenty of food. But oftentimes I find that this tornado swirl in my mind isn't as bad, and I've been trying to just offer this to the Lord and say, Jesus, I need your help. And I feel like his word to me is do one thing at a time. Don't start with 15 things. Do one thing, and then do the next thing. Have you guys ever been there? You feel so overwhelmed. You feel kind of in over your head. It might be a bunch of little things swirling around like me. It might be like a super monster thing that you're like, I don't know how this is going to work out. So has Paul Ford. Paul Ford has been there. I heard about Paul Ford a few years ago listening to a podcast called Reply All. And Reply All tells the story of Paul, and Paul just talks about how he struggled with anxiety, voices in his head that are always like, you're trash, you're garbage, and it's like on repeat all the time in his mind. And it was stressing him out. He wasn't finishing projects. He was trying to figure out how to spend time with his daughters, and he was just overwhelmed. And he was a software programmer. So he thought, I'm going to tackle this the way a software programmer would tackle it. So he decided to treat anxiety like an IT problem, and he created a website called the Anxiety Box. And if you go to the Anxiety Box website, you enter your name, you enter your email, and then you list the things that make you anxious. And then 12 times a day, the Anxiety Box will send you an email from your anxiety 12 times a day. But these are not encouraging emails. For instance, June 2nd, the subject line for Paul: history will forget you because history forgets people who are unable to finish anything. Message: Dear Paul, so you're probably used to being at the front of the class, and this is a wake-up call that you're not even in the middle. Inform me, are you ready? Sincerely, your anxiety. 12 times a day, breakfast, ping. The simple reason you're not happy is because you're unworthy of saving. Work, ping. I respect that you just live your life and don't care if people think you're childish and disgusting. While watching your kids, ping. Your mom and dad would never say anything, but they so want to know why you choose to be unlovable and not smart. Before going to bed, ping. People on Facebook look at your picture and think, in possession of a weird nose. I'm listening to this interview Paul Ford, and he's baffled. And the interviewer is like, you made this to make yourself feel less anxious and better? And this is what Paul says. He says, the thing that I'm trying to do here is externalize anxiety and simulate it by creating a personality for my anxiety. And I'm better able to see, oh, this part of me is incredibly stupid. It says the same things over and over again. And really, that is what my anxiety looks like. It's not smart. It's like a little screaming robot. And what these emails let me do is they let me look at the robot. And then seeing your anxiety as a personality is actually funny. It turns your emotional freak out into comedy. You're not as important as you think you are. Nowhere near as terrible as you think you are. And actually fairly ridiculous. Oh my gosh, I've been wasting so much time with this stuff, losing so much time. It doesn't necessarily get solved, but you just become more aware of it. It's still there, it's still moving, it's still part of me. Probably be there until I die, but it doesn't have as much control. I found that story about Paul Ford fascinating, because we all know that feeling, that just being stuck up here, that swirl, that tornado swirl. So scripture is going to be on the screen, but you can also turn on or open your Bibles to the book of Matthew, chapter 14. And Matthew is about 3/4 of the way back in my Bible. It's right after the book of Malachi. It's right before the book of Mark. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all the gospel. They're all the story of Jesus' birth, life, teaching, death on the cross for our sins, buried, raised from the dead, ascended to heaven as the world's true king. These are all the gospel. And Matthew is one of them. And we're going to pick up at a spot in his story of Jesus where Jesus and his disciples have just received some devastating news. And they're looking for a way to get away and to escape and to process. And they're in this spot where they feel in over their heads. And they're still figuring it out. And you know what? If Jesus' disciples are still figuring out what relationship with Jesus looks like and following Jesus, it's okay if you're still figuring out what relationship with Jesus looks like and what following Jesus looks like. But here they are. They received some devastating news, and they're trying to get away, but the crowds won't leave them alone. And so Matthew chapter 14, and we're going to start big number 14, little number 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, this devastating news, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. I want to just pause for just a moment, because Jesus is grieved and he's saddened in this moment, and he's trying to get away, and he's trying to find space to be with the Father. But then he sees the crowds and he has compassion. And sometimes when we're overwhelmed and we're in over our heads, the thing we need to do is not escape yet, but it's to give ourselves away. There's healing that's found in serving. And I read a book by a guy named Michael Chitwood a few years ago, and he's reflecting on his life after the death of his dad and his two brothers. And he says, and I'll have the quote on the screen, "Through these events, I have come to believe some things. First, there is more pain in this life for me than I could ever have imagined possible. Second, my pain pales in comparison with the pain of others, and God expects me to do something to relieve their suffering. And third, almost every good thing God has for us in this life lies just on the other side of fear." Sometimes when we're overwhelmed, the best thing we could do is to do something for others. But Jesus does eventually get away. And now we're going to meet his disciples who are overwhelmed and feeling in over their heads. Let's keep going. Little number 15. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." That seems like a good idea. They're getting worried about the crowds not being able to eat. And Jesus turns to them and says, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they say, "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. You give them something to eat." Now they're really feeling in over their heads. And the question is, like, why would Jesus tell them to do this? Right? He knows the impossibility of what he's asking them to do. He knows they don't have the food that it's going to take to feed these crowds. He knows the size of the crowd. He knows who he's working with, and sometimes the disciples are just a little slow, which is great news for us if we're just a little slow. But he calls, I think this is why. I think Jesus turns to them and says, "You give them something to eat," because he wants us to do big things. But he's not asking them to do big things alone. And he's not asking us to do big things alone. He wants to do them with us. So let's keep going. What's going to happen? "Please bring the fish and loaves to me," Jesus said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. And Jesus asked them to do something that he knows they can't do without him. And then he comes through. They're feeling in over their heads. They're not sure how this is all going to work. And he miraculously feeds the crowds. Now, there's something really significant in this story that I don't want to skip over. So let's, an aside, and then we're going to come back. Matthew tells us in his gospel that they're in a remote place. He wants us to think back to something. Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, and he wants us to remember when God's people were in a remote place, in the wilderness, in Exodus. And when they were in the wilderness, in the Exodus, and God had rescued them from Egypt, you know who provided his people with food? God. And so Matthew here is saying, hey, they're in a remote place. And you know who's going to provide food for the people? Jesus. Matthew is telling us here, Jesus is God. It's subtle, but it's there. And any Jewish person reading his gospel is going to pick up on it right away. So Jesus feeds the crowds. But notice how he does it. He gave the food to the disciples, and the disciples give it to the people. Jesus is working with his disciples. He intends to use them to feed the people. Jesus doesn't have a t-shirt gun and pop the fish and the loaves and he's like, pacoom, 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 pacoom. He gives it to the disciples give it to the people. He's asked them to do a God-sized thing, but he's doing it with them. And can I take a moment to just talk about the Front Church and where we're headed over the next 2 months and 1 day. 2 months and 1 day from now is our grand opening. And we are staring at an impossible task. 5 mile radius from this spot, there are 96,000 people, and there are 3 Christian churches. We're going to be number 4. Any churches, non-denominational Christian churches, that start in the Salt Lake Valley, only 15% of them make it to their 5th birthday. This is a hard task. I've been telling people, like, hey, you don't even have to, leave your church to help us. Just, come help us a couple Sundays a month, just to get this thing off the ground, because we're staring at a hard task. We're ramping up towards September 12th, and we have 92 roles to fill for volunteers. And if 92 roles were filled, that would mean that every volunteer is volunteering every other week, not every week. We have 41 roles per Sunday. And sometimes this feels absolutely insane. And we need your help to pull it off. We can't do it. Right? We need more people on our setup team. We need more people to transform this space into cafe space and welcome people and host people. We need people for audio and visual and sound. And we need a prayer team that's some people willing to pray with people. And we need more volunteers with Kid Front. And sometimes it seems insanely big. And sometimes I feel like Jesus has turned to us and says, you give them something to eat. But you know what? I don't think faith is really faith if there isn't a healthy element of, God, you got to pull this off. This is insane. You have to do this. And honestly, I just think we can forget what our God is capable of because we can think it's just on us. And we have a role to play. Look at this story. The disciples had a role to play. He says, you give them something to eat. Then he creates the food. Then he gives the food to them. And they're the ones that give the people something to eat. They have a role to play, but he has a role to play. And that's where we get to rest. We're doing stuff, but he does the stuff. He does the miracle. He multiplies the bread and the loaves. He does it. Let's keep reading. Okay. And they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Jesus makes them leave. And I bet when they got on that boat, they had a lot to talk about. You know what we just saw? And I am praying that on Sunday, September 12th, after our grand opening, we go home and we have a lot to talk about. We're like, I cannot wait to see Jesus turn lives upside down. And he's doing it right now. We're just up in the scale, baby, and asking God to come through. I can't wait to have a lot to talk about. But after all this, he finally gets alone with his Father. And I think that when we're in over our heads, sometimes that's right where Jesus wants us. So we can watch him work. So there's no illusion that we somehow manufactured this one. Like, he had to do it. And I think sometimes in these in over our head moments, we can get so stuck in them that we don't realize they're actually opportunities to point us to prayer. They're opportunities to point us to Jesus. If we let them, they can steer our hearts towards him. I think we like our faith abstract. We like theoretical faith. And I think Jesus wants our faith to be embodied. Hey, why don't you actually try this? Watch me come through. Embodied faith, that's where we learn, what does surrender look like? What does following his leading look like? How do we trust him? Can we trust him? There's a healthy bit of risk there. When's the last time you looked at the tornado swirl in your head as opportunity to learn to trust Jesus? It can move us to prayer. It can move us to him. We can remember that when he turns to us to say, you give them something to eat, he's in it with us. When's the last time you looked at your anxiety as opportunity? Now, here's the thing. I get that, some folks need medication to take care of your anxiety. I'm not trying to belittle that or anything like that. Don't hear me say that. What I am saying is wherever you are on the anxiety spectrum, when's the last time you looked at it and said, okay, Jesus, what are you trying to do in me? How can this point me towards you? How can this point me towards trust? How can I learn to surrender? When you're overwhelmed and in over your head, are you trying to fix it? Or are you seeing it as an opportunity, realizing actually maybe Jesus wants to form something in you in this? Maybe he's trying to point something out in you. And here's the thing, none of us are good at this, right? None of us. I am not good at this. I am learning this. I am not good at it. But you know what? The gospel frees us to admit that. We don't have to pretend to have it all together. The cross frees us to be radically honest about what's going on in here. All the struggles, all the sins, all the failures, all the doubts, all the questions. We can bring it forward. Because the cross, the very admittance of becoming a follower of Jesus, is admitting not we have it all together, but we don't have it all together. That's not just the entry requirement for becoming a Jesus follower. That is what a Jesus follower does. And so Paul Ford, he externalized his anxiety with the anxiety box. And he created this thing, and he got to the point where he's like, oh, these thoughts are silly. But even if we do this, where do the good thoughts come from? Where does the truth about who you are come from? You might be able to think this is crazy, but where does the truth about you come from? It comes from Jesus. Jesus tells you who you are. Jesus tells you, his cross tells you what you are worth. You are worth it all. You are worth his very life. His cross then redefines you. And you're not defined by your failures. You're not defined by the things you struggle most with. You're not defined by your anxiety. You're not defined by your shortcomings. You get to be defined by Jesus. And he says you're forgiven. He says you're righteous. He says you're right with God. I took all that on the cross, he's saying. You get to be redefined in light of who he is. There's one more thing in our story that I want to hit, and don't miss it. In the midst of them feeling in over their heads, in the midst of their grief and their loss, in the midst of their not sure how this is going to turn out, Jesus is with them. He doesn't say, well, you got to figure that all out before I come back. When they're overwhelmed, he's with them in the story. When they're not sure how it's all going to turn out, he's with them. When they're feeling in over their heads, he's with them. He's not apart from them, he's with them. And he wants to be with you. He's not keeping himself at a distance from you, waiting for you to prove your worth, waiting for you to show him, oh, I got this, I can tackle this. No, that's not how it works. He's with you. He wants to be with you, and he wants to do this with you. And at the Front Church, we believe that the gospel of Jesus frees us to a radical honesty, that the cross enables us to be real and level about what's really going on in here. And we believe Jesus wants us to experience him. Some of my favorite words of Jesus, he says, come all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He's saying to us, let me tell you who you are. Let my cross tell you what you're worth. Let my cross redefine who you are. That is the Jesus we get to learn to follow together as the Front Church. Can we pray?